She detected the human ship on radar and froze, not just a legend. Part 1. The stars were quiet that night. They were always quiet on the outer rim of Velen space, where nothing interesting ever happened, and patrols were considered punishment more than duty. Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of the scout cruiser Pale Wing, her arms folded behind her back, watching the darkness through the observation window. The hum of the engines was the only sound. Her crew of 40 moved through their stations like ghosts, bored and half asleep. Yuna did not blame them. She had been running this patrol route for 6 months now, and in all that time, nothing had appeared on their sensors except asteroids, old cargo debris, and the occasional lost mining drone. The Velen had maintained peace in this sector for over 200 years. Their borders were respected. Their treaties held firm. There was simply nothing out here to find. Lieutenant Hana sat at the sensor console near the front of the bridge. She was younger than Yuna by several years, sharp-eyed and restless, the kind of officer who deserved a better assignment than babysitting empty space. Her fingers moved across the console out of habit, cycling through scan frequencies the way a musician might play scales. Not because she expected to find anything, but because doing nothing made her anxious. Then the console made a sound. It was a small sound, a soft chime that most of the bridge crew didn't even notice. But Hana's fingers stopped moving. She stared at the screen. A new contact had appeared at the very edge of their long-range radar, far out in the blackness between star systems. It was moving slowly, steadily, on a course that would bring it closer to their patrol zone within hours. "Captain," Hana said, and something in her voice made Yuna turn immediately. Yuna walked to the sensor console and looked over Hana's shoulder. The contact was a single ship. Its energy output was strange, far higher than anything the Velen used for a vessel of that size. The signature did not match any known species in the Galactic Registry. Not Velen, not their allies the Tirani, not the merchant fleets of the Kasari, not even the aggressive but predictable warships of the border clans. "Unknown classification," Hana said quietly. "I've run it through every database we have. No match." Yuna frowned. Unknown ships were rare, but not impossible. New species were discovered every few decades. Unregistered smugglers sometimes appeared with modified vessels. There were rational explanations. "Run it through the historical archives. Go back as far as the system allows." Hana's fingers moved again, pulling up records that went back centuries. Old files, restricted files, things that most Velen officers never bothered to open. The search took nearly a minute, which was unusual. The system was digging deep. Then it found a match. Hana went very still. The color drained from her face. Her hands hovered over the console without touching it, as if the screen itself had become dangerous. Yuna watched her lieutenant's reaction and felt something cold settle in her chest. "What is it?" Yuna asked. Hana turned to look at her captain. Her eyes were wide. "The signature matches a profile in the restricted historical database. It's classified under Old Velen military intelligence. The file is over 300 years old." "What profile?" Hana swallowed. "Human." The word landed on the bridge like a stone dropped into still water. The officers nearest to them stopped what they were doing. The helmsman looked up from his station. The communications officer pulled off one side of her headset. Everyone knew the word. Everyone had heard the stories. Yuna felt her body go rigid. Her fingers gripped the edge of the sensor console hard enough to hurt. Humans, the Death World species, the ones from the planet called Earth, a world of crushing gravity, violent weather, extreme temperatures, and predators that hunted in packs. A species that should have been too fragile, too short-lived, too primitive to matter in a galaxy of ancient civilizations. But the stories said otherwise. The stories said humans had burst onto the galactic stage like wildfire. They were not the smartest species, or the strongest, or the most advanced, but they were something worse. They were stubborn. They adapted. They refused to stay down when they were beaten. When the Dominion of Kal, the most powerful military empire the galaxy had ever known, turned its full force against humanity, the galaxy expected the war to last weeks. It lasted 40 years, and when it ended, it was the Kal who were gone, and the humans who remained standing in the ashes. Then the humans went silent. They retreated to their ruined worlds and disappeared. 300 years passed. No signals, no ships, no contact. Gradually, the galaxy stopped believing they were real. They became legends, campfire stories told to frighten cadets, tall tales about unkillable soldiers and ships that fought until they broke apart and then kept fighting. Most Velen scholars agreed that humanity had gone extinct. The war with the Kal had been too costly. No species could survive that level of destruction and bounce back. It was simply not possible. But the radar contact on Hana's screen was real. The energy signature was real. The match to the old files was real. "Are you certain?" Yuna asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Hana checked the results 3 more times. 97% match, Captain. The profile is old, but the core energy patterns are consistent. If the data is accurate, that ship is human. The bridge was completely silent now. Every officer was looking at Yuna, waiting. She could feel their fear. She could feel her own. Yuna forced herself to breathe. She was a captain. Her crew needed her to think clearly. "Go to silent running," she ordered. "Kill all active emissions. Passive sensors only. I don't want them to know we're here." The crew obeyed instantly. The pale wing went dark, drifting through space like a dead stone, watching. Yuna moved to the communication station. "Encrypt a priority transmission to Admiral Tejo at High Command. Highest classification. My eyes only." The communications officer prepared the channel with shaking hands. Yuna leaned close to the microphone and spoke in a voice that was steady, even though her hearts were racing. "Admiral, this is Captain Yuna of the Pale Wing. I am transmitting a sensor profile for your review. You will find that it matches a restricted file in the Historical Military Archive. I know what that file says. I have confirmed the match 3 times. There is a ship at the edge of our patrol zone, and it is not Velen. It is not any known species. Sir, I believe the legends are true. I believe humanity has returned. Awaiting orders. Pale Wing out." She cut the transmission and stood straight. The bridge hummed with silence and fear. Then Hana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, the contact has changed course." Yuna looked at the screen. The unknown ship, the human ship, had turned. It was no longer drifting on its original path. It was heading directly toward them. Yuna's blood went cold. They were supposed to be invisible. Silent running meant no emissions, no signals, nothing for another ship to detect. And yet the human vessel had found them, and turned as casually as someone glancing over their shoulder. The bridge crew stared at the screen in horror. Yuna gripped the edge of the console and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The legends were coming straight for them, and the legends did not look like they were in a hurry. That, somehow, was the most terrifying part of all. She detected the human ship on radar, and froze. Not just a legend, Part 2. Admiral Tejo had not slept in 30 hours, but he did not feel tired. He felt something much worse. He felt afraid. He stood in the war room of Velen High Command, a vast circular chamber deep inside the orbital station above the Velen homeworld. Holographic displays floated in the air around him, showing fleet positions, patrol routes, and diplomatic channels. Everything looked normal, everything looked peaceful. But the encrypted message from Captain Yuna sat in his personal terminal like a bomb waiting to go off. He had listened to it 4 times. Each time, he hoped he had misunderstood. Each time, the words were the same. Humanity has returned. Taeho had summoned the only person who might know what to do. Elder Soren arrived within the hour. A tall, thin figure with silver-white skin and eyes that had seen more history than most databases contained. Soren was the keeper of the Velen archives, the oldest living scholar, and one of the few people with full access to the restricted military files from the Age of Empires. He walked slowly into the war room, leaning on a staff that was purely decorative. Soren was old, but he was not frail. He looked at the holographic displays, then at Taeho, and his expression said that he already knew why he had been called. "Show me the sensor data," Soren said. Taeho transferred Yuna's transmission to the main display. The energy signature of the unknown ship bloomed across the hologram in blue and white. Soren studied it for a long time without speaking. His fingers traced the patterns in the air, comparing them to something only he could see in his memory. "It is human," Soren said finally. "There is no doubt." Taeho closed his eyes. "The Council believes they are extinct." "The Council believes what is comfortable," Soren replied. "I never shared that belief. A species that survived Earth does not simply die. They endure. That is what makes them what they are." Taeho opened his eyes. "Tell me what we are dealing with. Not the children's stories, not the legends. Tell me the truth." Soren nodded slowly and began to speak, and what he said changed everything Taeho thought he knew. 312 years ago, humanity made first contact with the galaxy. They were young, barely a century into faster-than-light travel, and laughably behind the older civilizations in technology, resources, and numbers. The galaxy noticed them the way one might notice a small animal wandering into a room full of giants, with mild curiosity and no concern. But humans spread fast. They colonized worlds that other species considered uninhabitable. High gravity, toxic atmospheres, extreme climates. Where other species terraformed carefully over centuries, humans simply adapted. They built pressure domes in volcanic wastelands. They farmed ice moons. They thrived in conditions that would kill most galactic citizens within days. This caught the attention of the Dominion of Kal. The Kal were conquerors. They had built their empire by crushing every species they encountered, enslaving billions, and stripping entire star systems of resources. They were powerful, organized, and utterly ruthless. When they looked at humanity's rapid expansion, they saw a threat that needed to be eliminated early. The Kal attacked Earth's outer colonies without warning. They expected a quick victory. Humanity had no real military fleet, no war experience on a galactic scale, and no allies. The first battles were massacres. Human colonies burned. Millions died. And then something happened that the Kal did not expect. Humanity did not surrender. They did not run. They got angry. Within months, humans had converted civilian ships into warships. They built weapons from mining equipment. They turned asteroid fields into ambush zones. They fought with a ferocity that stunned the Kal commanders, who had conquered dozens of species and never encountered anything like it. The war lasted 40 years. 40 years of grinding, brutal, unrelenting combat. The Kal threw everything they had at humanity. Their greatest fleets, their most advanced weapons, their most experienced generals. Humans lost battle after battle and kept coming back. They learned from every defeat. They adapted their tactics between engagements. When their ships were destroyed, they built new ones. When their soldiers fell, more took their place. Soren paused and looked at Taeho. "Do you know what the Kal called them near the end?" Taeho shook his head. "Because no matter what was done to them, they would not break." In the final year of the war, a human fleet, led by a commander whose name had been lost to history, launched a direct assault on the Kal homeworld. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The humans knew it. They went anyway. They crashed their own ships into the Kal orbital defense grid. They flew damaged vessels straight into enemy capital ships. They detonated their own reactors inside enemy formations. The Kal command structure collapsed in a single day of fire and sacrifice. The Dominion fell apart within weeks. But humanity paid a terrible price. Earth itself was scarred by orbital bombardment. Their colonies were in ruins. Their population had been cut by more than half. The species that had broken the greatest empire in galactic history was itself broken, not in spirit, but in body. They retreated inward, pulled back their remaining ships, and went silent. 300 years of silence, and now they have returned, Soren said quietly. The question, Admiral, is what you intend to do about it. Tejo stared at the holographic display. The sensor signature of the human ship glowed in the darkness like a heartbeat. I have ordered Captain Yuna to retreat, Tejo said. She is to avoid contact and return to the inner border. Soren raised an eyebrow. And if the humans follow? They won't. We will show them that we are not a threat by staying away. Soren was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. Admiral, the Kal tried to destroy them and failed. Other species tried to ignore them and were forgotten. Perhaps there is a third option that no one has tried. Which is? Talk to them. Tejo shook his head. The risk is too great. We do not know their intentions. We do not know their capabilities. We know nothing about them, except that they destroyed the most powerful empire in recorded history. We know one more thing, Soren said. We know that in all the records of the human war against the Kal, across 40 years of combat, humanity never once attacked a civilian population. They never struck a species that was not fighting them. They never used their weapons against the helpless. They fought the Kal and only the Kal. He paused. That, Admiral, tells us more about them than any weapon ever could. Tejo said nothing for a long time. Thousands of light years away, aboard the Pale Wing, Captain Yuna received Admiral Tejo's orders. She read them twice. Retreat immediately. Avoid all contact. Do not engage. She looked at the main screen. The human ship was closer now. It had slowed its approach, as if it was trying not to seem threatening. It had not raised shields. It had not armed weapons. It simply moved toward them, with the calm patience of something that had nothing to fear. Then the communications console lit up. An open channel hail. No encryption, no tricks. Just a simple, clear signal. A voice filled the bridge. It was a male voice, speaking in accented but perfectly understandable galactic common. It sounded calm, warm even. This is Commander Doyen of the Earth vessel Guangato. We come without hostile intent, requesting permission to communicate. The bridge crew looked at Yuna. Hana looked at Yuna. The Admiral's orders were clear. Retreat. Avoid contact. Do not engage. Yuna stared at the screen. Her orders said one thing, but something deeper, something that had nothing to do with orders or protocols or fear, told her something else. She reached for the communications panel, and she opened the channel. She detected the human ship on radar, and froze. Not just a legend. Part 3. The docking bridge was a narrow corridor of gray metal and cold air, connecting the Pale Wing to the Guangato through a temporary seal. It was designed for emergency transfers, not diplomacy. The walls were bare. The lights were harsh. It was the most uncomfortable place on either ship, and that somehow made it perfect for a meeting that should not have been happening. Captain Yuna stood on the Velen side of the bridge, with Lieutenant Hana and 4 security officers behind her. The security team carried sidearms, more out of habit than any real belief that they would help. If the stories about humans were even half true, 4 armed Velen guards would not matter. Yuna had changed into her formal uniform. She had considered this carefully. If she wore combat gear, it might signal hostility. If she wore casual clothes, it might signal disrespect. The formal uniform said something simple. I am taking this seriously. She hoped the humans would understand. The airlock on the far end of the bridge opened. 3 figures stepped through. The first was a man of medium height and solid build. He wore a dark blue uniform with simple markings on the shoulders. His hair was black and cut short. His face was calm, almost relaxed, and there were lines around his eyes that came from either smiling or squinting into bright light. Yuna could not tell which. He moved with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own body. This was Commander Doyun. Behind him came a woman, shorter, lean, with her hair pulled back tight against her head. She wore the same uniform, but with different markings. Her eyes were dark and steady, and she carried no visible weapons, but something in the way she walked told Yuna that this woman did not need weapons to be dangerous. This was Sergeant Jisoo. The third was a young man, barely out of his youth by human standards. He was taller than the other two, with an open, curious face that kept turning to look at the walls, the ceiling, the Velen ship's design. His eyes were wide with fascination, not fear. This was Ensign Minho. Yuna studied them as they approached. They were smaller than she expected. The legends described humans as towering, broad, terrifying. These 3 looked almost ordinary. Doyun could have been a teacher or a merchant in another life. Jisoo could have been a dancer. Minho looked like a student. But then Yuna noticed the details. Doyun's hands were rough and scarred. A thin white line ran from his jaw to just below his ear. An old wound, healed but never erased. His calm was not the calm of someone who had never known danger. It was the calm of someone who had seen so much danger that he had learned to carry it quietly. Jisoo's movements were precise. Every step was measured. Every turn of her head was controlled. She never moved unnecessarily. When she stopped walking, she stood perfectly still, her weight balanced, her hands relaxed at her sides. Yuna had seen that kind of stillness before, in predators, in the moment before they struck. And Minho, for all his wide-eyed curiosity, had eyes that never stopped scanning. He noted the exits. He measured the distance between the 2 groups. He glanced at the Velen guards and assessed them in a heartbeat. He did it all without thinking, the way a person might breathe. These were not merchants or scholars. These were soldiers wearing polite faces. Commander Doyun stopped 3 paces from Yuna and dipped his head in a slight bow. Captain Yuna, thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is unusual. His voice was the same as it had been on the communication channel. Calm, warm, and careful. He spoke Galactic Common fluently, though with a rhythm that was distinctly human. He chose his words the way a person walks through a room full of glass, with great care not to break anything. It is more than unusual, Yuna replied. Your species has been absent from the galaxy for 300 years. Most believe you no longer exist. Doyun smiled at that. It was a small, tired smile. We almost didn't. There was a weight behind those 3 words that silenced everyone on the bridge. Yuna led the group to a small meeting area that the crew had hastily prepared. A table, chairs, water, and nothing else. The 2 groups sat across from each other. The Velen security officers stood against the walls. Jisoo and Minho took positions behind Doyun with the same quiet alertness. He explained, simply and directly, what had happened to humanity. After the war with the Call, Earth and its surviving colonies had retreated from galactic contact. The cost of the war had been devastating. Billions dead, worlds destroyed, an entire generation lost. Humanity needed time to heal, not just their cities and their ships, but their spirit. They had won the war, but the victory had left scars that went deeper than any weapon could reach. For 300 years, they rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, they improved their technology, they grew their population, they healed their world, and they watched. We sent unmanned probes into the galaxy, Doyen said. Small, quiet, nearly invisible. We watched what happened after we left. We saw new civilizations rise. We saw old ones change. We saw peace spread in many sectors. He paused, and we saw something else. He reached into his uniform and produced a small device. He placed it on the table and activated it. A holographic star map appeared, the galaxy, rendered in blue light, with thousands of points marking known systems and civilizations. Then a shadow appeared on the far edge of the map, a dark stain that spread across dozens of systems, consuming them one by one. It moved slowly, but without pause, swallowing stars like a disease spreading through a body. "We call them the Sunless Reach," Doyen said. "They are an empire, though that word does not capture what they truly are. They consume, they enslave, they strip worlds of every resource and leave nothing behind. They have been expanding for over a century, and they have destroyed or absorbed every civilization in their path." Yuna stared at the map. The dark shadow was enormous, and it was moving toward Velen space. "Our long-range sensors have detected nothing like this," she said. "Your sensors are designed for known threats," Doyen replied gently. "The Sunless Reach uses technology that absorbs and scatters standard detection methods. Our sensor systems are different. We built them during our long silence, specifically to watch for threats that did not want to be seen." He paused. "We built them because we were afraid." That single admission, a human admitting fear, struck Yuna more deeply than anything else. The legends never mentioned fear. The legends said humans were fearless, unstoppable, impossible to intimidate. But Doyun sat across from her with honest eyes and said plainly that his species had spent 3 centuries being afraid. "At their current rate of expansion," Doyun continued, "the Sunless Reach will reach Velen border space within 2 years, perhaps less." The room went cold. Lieutenant Hana leaned forward. "Why are you telling us this? Why come to us?" Doyun looked at her. "Because you are in their path. And because we do not want to watch another civilization burn while we do nothing," Yuna said. "You could fight them alone. If the stories about your species are true, you have the strength." Doyen shook his head. "We have strength, yes, but strength alone did not defeat the call. Sacrifice defeated the call, and sacrifice nearly destroyed us. We do not want to walk that road again." He looked at Yuna directly. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here to control. We are here to ask if you will stand with us. As partners. As equals." Yuna held his gaze. She searched his face for lies, for hidden intentions, for the monster that the legends promised. She found none. She found only a tired man with scarred hands and honest eyes, asking for help in the simplest way he knew how. She opened her mouth to respond, and then every alarm on both ships went off at the same time. Hana lunged for the nearest console. Minho was already on his feet, his hand at his ear, listening to a communication from the Guan Ghetto. Jisoo had shifted her stance, without anyone noticing. She was now between Doyun and the door, balanced and ready. "Distress signal," Hana said, her voice tight. "All channels. It's coming from the Velen colony on Aelith." Yuna's blood went cold. Aelith was a border colony, 30,000 civilians, minimal defenses. Hana looked up from the console, and her face was white. "Captain, they're under attack. Unknown forces. The colony's defense fleet has been destroyed." Doyun stood slowly. He looked at Yuna, and the warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something older and harder. Something that had been sleeping for 300 years. "Captain," he said quietly, "how fast can your ship reach that colony?" The Sunless Reach had arrived, and they were 2 years early. She detected the human ship on radar and froze. Not just a legend. Part 4. The colony of Aelith burned beneath a sky full of enemies. The Sunless Reach had come with 12 warships, massive dark vessels that looked less like machines and more like living things. Their hulls were black and uneven, covered in ridges and grooves that seemed to pulse with a dim inner light. They moved through space with a slow, terrible grace, like deep-sea creatures rising from the dark. The colony's defense fleet had consisted of 3 patrol frigates and a single aging cruiser. They had lasted 9 minutes. Their wreckage now drifted in orbit above Aelith, burning silently in the vacuum. On the surface below, 30,000 Velen civilians huddled in underground shelters, while the enemy ships began landing troops. The Pale Wing dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, followed seconds later by the Guangaito. Yuna stood at her command station and stared at the tactical display. 12 enemy warships. Each one was 3 times the size of her scout cruiser. The Pale Wing had light shields and scanning equipment. It was not built for combat. It was built to observe, to run, to survive. "Captain," Hana said from her station, her voice steady but thin, "Admiral Tejo has confirmed the nearest Velen battle group is 47 hours away. 47 hours. The colony would be gone in 4. A communication came through from the Guangaito. Commander Doyun's voice filled the bridge, and it sounded different now. The warmth was still there, buried somewhere deep, but the surface was iron. "Captain Yuna, I need you to hold position at the edge of the system. Keep your sensors active and record everything. Do not engage." Yuna gripped the arms of her chair. "Commander, what are you planning?" When Doyun spoke again, his voice was simple and flat, like a man stating the weather. "I am going to buy your people time." The Guangaito surged forward. Its engines flared with a light so bright that the Pale Wing's sensors had to adjust. The human ship accelerated toward the enemy fleet at a speed that should have torn the vessel apart. And Yuna watched in disbelief as a single ship, one ship, charged directly into the heart of 12 warships that had just destroyed an entire defense fleet in minutes. "He's insane," Hana whispered. But what happened next was not insanity. It was something far more terrifying. It was precision. The Guangaito did not attack blindly. Ensign Minho, at the helm, flew the ship into the enemy formation through a gap between 2 of the largest vessels, a gap so narrow that one wrong calculation would have meant instant death. The Sunless Reach ships opened fire, and their weapons were devastating. Beams of dark energy cut through space, each one powerful enough to melt through the Pale Wing's shields in a single hit. Minho dodged them. Not by luck, not by chance, but with movements so precise and calculated that Yuna could barely follow them on the tactical display. The Guangaito twisted, rolled, dove, and climbed through a storm of weapons fire, and not a single shot found its mark. Then the Guangaito fired back. The first target was not what Yuna expected. Doyun did not aim for the nearest ship or the biggest ship. He aimed for the communication array of the enemy command vessel, a small, almost invisible structure on the largest warship's dorsal spine. The Guangaito's weapon struck with surgical accuracy, and the array exploded in a shower of debris. In an instant, the enemy fleet lost its coordination. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation began to hesitate, their movements becoming uncertain. Without their command ship directing them, they were forced to act independently, and independently, they were less effective. Doyun exploited this immediately. The Guangaito carved through the fleet, isolating individual ships and hammering them with focused fire. The human weapons were unlike anything in the Velen database. Rapid, adaptive, switching between energy types, as if the ship itself was learning what hurt the enemy most. Shields that deflected one type of weapon were hit with another. Armor that absorbed kinetic rounds was burned through with plasma. Every attack was different, and every attack found its mark. On the bridge of the Pale Wing, the Velen crew watched in stunned silence. Hana's hands had stopped moving over her console. The security officers stood frozen. Nobody spoke. One of the Sunless Reach ships managed to get behind the Guangato and scored a direct hit on the port side. The human ship shuddered violently. A section of hull plating tore away, exposing the decks beneath to space. Atmosphere vented in a white plume. Warning lights flashed. But the Guangato did not stop. It did not slow. It did not retreat. Inside the damaged section, Sergeant Jisoo led a damage control team through corridors filled with smoke and floating debris. She moved with the same controlled precision Yuna had noticed during their meeting. But now that precision had a purpose. She sealed bulkheads with her bare hands when the automated systems failed. She dragged wounded crew members to safety. She plugged a hull breach with an emergency plate while the ship lurched beneath her feet. And she did it all without hesitation, without complaint, and without stopping to be afraid. The breach was sealed in 3 minutes. The ship kept fighting. Doyun's voice came over the bridge speakers, calm and measured, issuing orders that sounded almost casual. Turn 30 degrees starboard. Target the third vessel's engine cluster. Fire. Roll to port. Brace for impact. Fire again. His voice never rose. His breathing never quickened. He commanded the battle the way a surgeon might perform an operation, with focus, patience, and absolute control. One enemy ship went dark, its engines destroyed, then another, then a third, crippled by a volley that struck its power core and sent it spinning uselessly into the void. But the Guangato was paying for every kill. Another hit struck the forward section. Consoles exploded on the bridge. A support beam came loose and crashed to the deck. Minho took a piece of debris across his arm and kept flying with blood running down his sleeve. The ship groaned and screamed as its structure was pushed beyond its limits. On the pale wing, Yuna watched the human ship take hit after hit and keep fighting, and something inside her changed. She had spent her entire career following orders, staying safe, doing what was expected. She had been taught that the Velen survived by being careful, by staying neutral, by avoiding fights they could not win. But 30,000 of her people were on that planet below, and a single human ship was bleeding and burning to protect them, while she watched from a safe distance. No more. Helm, Yuna said, and her voice was steady. Take us in. Hana spun around. Captain, we're a scout ship. We don't have the weapons to. We have shields, Yuna said. The best shields in the Velen fleet. Take us in. Position us on the Guangato's damaged port side. We'll be their armor. The bridge crew stared at her. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the helmsman turned to his console, and the pale wings surged forward. The scout ship dove into the battle and slid into position alongside the Guangato, placing itself between the human ship's wounded flank and the enemy fleet. The Sunless Reach ships opened fire on the newcomer, and the pale wing's shields lit up like a star, absorbing hit after hit after hit. The ship rattled, the lights flickered, but the shields held, and the Guangato's exposed side was protected. Doyun's voice came through on a private channel. It was thick with something Yuna could not immediately identify. Captain Yuna, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she replied. Together the two ships fought. The pale wings shielded while the Guangato struck. They moved as one, covering each other's weaknesses, combining Velen defense technology with human offensive power. The Sunless Reach fleet, already disorganized and bleeding, could not handle this new partnership. One by one, the enemy ships fell. Others retreated, limping away into the darkness with shattered hulls and failing engines. When the last enemy vessel fled the system, the space above Aelith went quiet. The colony was saved. On the Guangato, Doyun sat in his command chair and allowed himself to breathe. His bridge was half destroyed. His ship was barely holding together. 17 of his crew were dead. Dozens more were wounded. Minho was being treated for his arm by a medic while still sitting at the helm. Jisoo had a burn across her shoulder that she had not bothered to mention to anyone. Doyun looked at the screen, where the pale wing floated alongside them, scarred but intact. He opened a channel. "Captain Yuna." "Commander." "Thank you." There was a pause. Then Yuna's voice came back, and it was warm. "You came out of 300 years of silence to warn us. It was the least I could do." Then a new signal appeared on the long-range sensors. Dozens of contacts, approaching fast. The Velen battle fleet had arrived, 47 hours early. Admiral Tejo had pushed his ships to their limits. And aboard the flagship, Admiral Tejo stared at the tactical replay of the battle and said nothing. There were no words for what he had just witnessed. The footage was already spreading across every Velen channel, and the galaxy was watching. She detected the human ship on radar and froze. Not just a legend. Part 5. The Tribunal Chamber at Velen High Command was the most formal room in the entire orbital station. Its walls were carved from pale stone imported from the homeworld below. Its ceiling was high and dark, lit by floating orbs that cast a cold, even light over everything. It was designed to make anyone standing at its center feel small, and it was very good at its job. Captain Yuna stood at the center of the chamber. She wore her dress uniform, cleaned and pressed, but she had not removed the small burn mark on the sleeve, a souvenir from the battle. She stood straight, her hands at her sides, and she did not look afraid. She had faced the sunless reach. A room full of politicians did not frighten her anymore. The council sat in a raised semicircle above her. 12 senior officials, their faces carefully blank, their opinions carefully hidden. Admiral Tejo sat among them, and his expression was the most difficult to read of all. The charges were simple. Captain Yuna had disobeyed a direct order from Admiral Tejo to retreat and avoid contact with the human vessel. She had initiated unauthorized communication with an unknown species. She had engaged in combat without orders. She had risked a Velen military vessel in a battle she was not equipped to fight. Each charge was true. Yuna did not deny any of them. The council debated for hours. Half of them wanted to strip her of command and make an example of her. The other half called her a hero. The arguments went back and forth, growing louder and more heated, until the chamber rang with voices and the floating lights seemed to tremble. Then Elder Soren stood. The room went silent. Soren rarely attended council sessions. When he did, people listened. He walked slowly to the center of the chamber, his staff clicking softly on the stone floor, and he stood beside Yuna as if they were old friends. "I would like to show the council something," he said. He activated the chamber's holographic display, and the entire room was suddenly filled with light. The footage from the Battle of Aleph played out in full color and dimension. The Guangeto charging into 12 enemy ships, weapons firing, hull burning, crew fighting and bleeding and refusing to stop. The council watched in silence. Then Soren overlaid the footage with something else. The ancient records from the HFY War, 300 years old, showing human ships in battle against the Dominion. The parallels were unmistakable. The same aggressive tactics, the same refusal to retreat, the same willingness to take damage and keep fighting. Ship after ship after ship, burning and broken, pushing forward anyway. "This is what humanity was," Soren said. "This is what we feared. This is the legend." He paused and let the old footage fade. The Battle of Aleph returned, and he zoomed in on a single moment. The Guangeto, battered and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds, turning to place itself between the enemy fleet and the planet below, protecting 30,000 Velen civilians it had no obligation to protect. "And this is what humanity is," Soren said. "Look at this. A species that has every reason to hate the galaxy. A galaxy that abandoned them during the HFY War, that forgot them, that turned them into ghost stories for children, came back and bled for people they had never met." He turned to the council. His voice was quiet, but it filled the chamber completely. After the battle, Commander Doyen was pulled from the wreckage of his bridge. He had burns on his hands and a piece of metal in his side. The first words out of his mouth were not about his ship, his crew, or his mission. He asked about the colonists. He asked if the people on the surface were safe. Soren let that sit for a moment. We have spent 300 years being afraid of humans. We called them monsters. We called them legends. We locked their records away in classified files because the truth of what they are was too much for us to face. He shook his head slowly. But we were wrong. They are not monsters. They are not legends. They are exactly what they have always been. A species that will walk into fire for people they have never met. He turned to look at every member of the council, one at a time. The question before this tribunal is not whether Captain Yuna disobeyed orders. She did. The question is whether her disobedience was just. And I tell you now, with every year of knowledge I carry, that if she had obeyed her orders, if she had run, 30,000 Valan would be dead or enslaved, and the human crew that died to protect them would have died for nothing. He paused one last time. The real question is not whether we should fear humanity. The question is whether we are brave enough to stand beside them. The chamber was utterly silent. Admiral Tejo rose from his seat. He looked at Yuna for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough. All charges against Captain Yuna are dismissed. Effective immediately, I am authorizing the opening of formal diplomatic relations with the species known as humanity. He hesitated, then added, and I am recommending Captain Yuna for the Silver Crest, for valor in combat, beyond the call of duty. The chamber erupted. She stood at the center of the room, her eyes stinging, and she thought of 17 humans who had died above a planet that was not theirs, for people they had never known. 3 days later, the Guangato was still in orbit above Aelith, undergoing emergency repairs. The Velen fleet had supplied materials, engineers, and medical staff. Velen doctors worked alongside human medics. Velen engineers studied human technology with wide eyes and shaking hands. On the surface, the colonists had emerged from their shelters and stood in the streets, looking up at the scarred human ship that had saved them. Yuna boarded the Guangato for the last time. The corridors were battered, walls dented, lights replaced with temporary strips, the smell of burnt metal still lingering. Crew members moved through the halls with bandages and burns, and the quiet exhaustion of people who had given everything and somehow survived. She found Commander Doyun on the observation deck. His arm was in a sling. His face was tired, but calm. He stood at the window, looking down at the blue-green curve of Aelith below, and he turned when he heard her footsteps. "Captain," he said, and he smiled. They stood together in silence for a moment. Below them, a world full of people went about their lives, alive because of what had happened in the space above their heads. "I wanted to thank you," Doyon said. "Not for the battle, for answering my hail, back at the beginning, when you first saw us on your radar, and everything in your training told you to run." He paused. "You didn't run. You answered. That mattered more than you know." Yuna looked at him. "Why?" Doyon was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "When we went silent, 300 years ago, we were afraid of many things. The galaxy, another war, another enemy. But our deepest fear was not about fighting. Our deepest fear was that when we finally came back, the galaxy would look at us and only see the monsters from the old stories. That they would see the battles and the fire and the destruction and think that was all we were." He looked at her. "You saw past the stories. You saw us." Yuna felt something tighten in her chest. She thought of the moment she had first seen his ship on the radar. The fear, the legends, the 300 years of silence. She thought of how close she had come to running. I almost didn't answer, she admitted. Do-yeon smiled. I know. I'm glad you did. She reached into her uniform and produced a data chip, small, silver, carrying the weight of history. The first formal alliance treaty between the Velen people and Earth, signed by Admiral Taeho himself. Do-yeon took it carefully, holding it as if it were made of glass. He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed his hand around it and nodded. We won't let you down, he said simply. Yuna believed him. The Gwangato departed the next morning. Its engines burned bright against the stars as it turned toward Earth space, carrying the treaty, carrying 17 empty bunks, carrying a bridge crew held together by bandages and stubbornness. Yuna watched from the bridge of the Pale Wing until the human ship was nothing but a fading light. Lieutenant Hana stepped up beside her. Captain, what do you think happens now? Yuna watched the empty screen for a long moment. The stars were quiet again, but they did not feel empty anymore. Somewhere out there, the sunless reach was moving, consuming, spreading. They had conquered every civilization in their path. They had never been stopped. They thought they knew what war looked like. They had never fought humans. The sunless reach is coming. They have conquered species who never knew true conflict. They have broken civilizations that had never been tested. They believe they are unstoppable because no one has ever stopped them. She paused and watched the stars. They have never fought humans, and now they will never fight humans alone. Hana looked at her captain and saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, not awe, but something that burned steady and quiet, like a flame that would not go out. The Pale Wing turned and set course for home. Behind it the stars stretched on forever, and somewhere among them, a battered ship with a crew of survivors carried a piece of paper that said, in the simplest terms possible, that humanity was no longer alone. The legends were over. The truth had just begun.